Good afternoon to everyone and welcome to today's virtual design review panel meeting. This is the first item on the agenda. I am Joe Bordeloni, host of this meeting, but panel member David Clusio will be the chair. In addition to the panel members, we have the applicant team, city staff, members of the public, and the media observing this meeting. Members of the public are welcome to observe the meeting only, please. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the DRP webpage. Just a reminder to please keep your microphones muted if you are not speaking. Thank you. David, you can please begin the meeting.
Afternoon and welcome. It's being recorded.
It is correct.
Changes to the
No changes to the agenda. You may, sorry, David, just want to turn up your microphone if you can. Sorry.
I can't hear you very well either, David.
Is that better?
Much better.
Yep.
Are there any panel members in attendance that have take silence as agreement? The first item on the agenda today is the review of 442 to 462 Wilson Street East. The lead planner on the file is James Van Roy. I don't know if I pronounced the last name correctly. I'm sorry if I got it wrong. Good afternoon, James. We're ready for your presentation. Please keep it focused in under 10 minutes.
Okay, afternoon, panelists. And yes, David, you said that correctly. Thank you for that. I'm just going to share my screen here. So we're here to discuss 442, 450, 454, and 462 Wilson Street East. Sorry, Joe, before I begin, is my mic okay? Or if anyone could just give me a thumbs up. Okay.
Sounds good.
So we have a 2-for-1 here. The first being we have a proposal for a 7-story retirement home with 211 beds, 4 commercial units totaling 263 square meters, and 1 level of underground parking. Or we have a proposal for a 6-story mixed-use multiple dwelling with 161 units, 7 commercial units, and 836 square meters of commercial space, and 2 levels of underground parking. The applicant has essentially submitted 2 options for us to consider, and so we are evaluating both options. And if the mixed use multiple dwelling were considered, it would have a density of 283 units per hectare. So here we have our site. Again, it's a collection of 4 properties, these 4 being right here. To the north is Rousseau Street. To the west, it's bound by Wilson Street East. And it's just as you're kind of driving up Wilson Street East towards Ancaster, where Ancaster and Rousseau intersect. So again, here's the intersection. We have here a Planning Act application sign. They have applied for an official plan amendment and a zoning bylaw amendment, which I'll discuss a bit later on in the policy section. This is 454 Wilson Street East. This is part of this property. Again, we have 450 Wilson Street East. This is part of the subject property that's the building's being retained. Here we have 442 Wilson Street East. This building is also being retained. This is a view of the property looking southwest, so Ancaster would be in this direction. Here we have a view looking south on Wilson Street. Again, Ancaster, the village core, the downtown area is in this direction. And here we have a view of Wilson Street looking north. That's as if you were going down towards Hamilton or Dundas. Here we have a view of the property. This is from Brookside Avenue. It's a bit hard to tell, but this fence here, board-on-board fence, would be the property line, the eastern property line of the subject property. You can kind of see the pine trees on the other side or the evergreens on the other side, kind of in the background there, that would be the western side of the property line, essentially. With single detached dwellings. To the east of this subject site, we have a single attached dwelling. To the south of the subject property, we have a commercial building that's, it looks as if it's a single attached dwelling, but it's operating as a commercial use. To the west of the subject lands, on the west side of Wilson Street East, we have a commercial building. We also have an institutional property, and we also have the Barracks Inn. So I'm just going through this fairly quickly because we have two concepts here and I only have 10 minutes, but here we have the concept plan for the retirement home. Again, it is a seven-story building. Right now, this area only permits 2.5 stories in its secondary plan. Here we have a picture of the parking plan and the roof plan. There may be a discrepancy. I think I've mentioned that there's 74 parking spaces. I think I might be taking information from a planning justification report or a urban design brief, but this plan indicates 90 parking spaces. And here we have our east elevation and our west elevation. The main difference between the retirement concept and the retirement home concept and the mixed use multiple dwelling concept is the removal of this, I'll say the 6th floor from the retirement concept. And here we have our elevation drawings for our retirement concept and our renderings as well. And so just to review the mixed use multiple dwelling concept, couple small changes. For one, we have an extra entrance into the concept plan from Wilson Street East, whereas the previous plan, I think it was just one entrance off of Rousseau and then an entrance for each of the commercial retained properties, which will be the heritage buildings. Again, this concept plan has 2 levels of underground parking. And here we have our elevation drawings for our mixed use multiple dwelling concept. And here we have our renderings. So in terms of the policy environment, the lands kind of fall on the cusp of a community node area and a neighborhoods in our Schedule E urban structure elements schedule of our official plan. So typically we'd look at both policies for both the neighborhoods structure and the community node structure. Looking further into our urban Hamilton official plan, we have Schedule E1, which designates the property as mixed use medium density. And just some of our policy themes for community nodes. They shall provide community scale retail stores and services to residents within the node and surrounding neighborhoods. They are to function as vibrant mixed use areas containing a range of opportunities, including affordable housing and housing with supports. They are to be planned for some residential intensification over time, and the location, scale, and amount of residential intensification should be established through these secondary plans. And just the medium density policy that we have that applies to this subject property. A range of uses are permitted, including multiple dwellings. I should note here that we don't specifically permit retirement homes in the mixed use medium density, but the applicant is applying for an urban Hamilton official plan amendment to allow for this. They contain mixed use medium density designation is meant to contain a range of densities and building heights up to a maximum of 6 stories. An additional 8 stories can be permitted if shadow impacts are addressed, if the buildings are progressively stepped back, if height is minimized. I should mention here, however, that again, the secondary plan, the Ancaster Wilson Street secondary plan expresses 2.5 story height limit. And We also have design guidelines for new development. New development shall be designed and oriented to create comfortable, vibrant, and stimulating pedestrian-oriented streets. New development shall respect the existing built form of adjacent neighborhoods by providing a gradation in building height and density, and locating and designing new development to minimize shadowing and overview on properties in adjacent neighborhoods. In the historic former downtowns and main streets, a strong historic pedestrian focus is long established and shall be enhanced through new development. Just our urban design policies continued. Urban design should foster a sense of community pride and identity by respecting existing character, development patterns, built form, and landscape, promoting quality design consistent with locale and surrounding environment, recognizing and protecting the cultural history of the city and its communities, create quality spaces that physically and visually connect the public and private realms, organizing space in a logical manner through the design, placement, and construction of new buildings, streets, structures, and landscaping, recognizing that every new building or structure is part of a greater whole that contributes to the overall appearance and visual cohesiveness of the urban fabric. In terms of built form, new development shall be located and organized to fit with the existing or planned context of the area. New development shall be designed to minimize impact on neighboring buildings and public spaces by creating transitions in scale to neighboring buildings, ensuring adequate privacy to sunlight to neighboring properties. Ensuring adequate privacy and sunlight to neighboring properties, and minimizing the impacts of shadow and wind conditions. New development shall be massed to respect existing and planned street proportions. So just diving into the Ancaster Wilson Street secondary plan, the lands are here. They're mixed use, medium density, and they also have a pedestrian focus component. They also are within the community node area, which Ancaster Wilson Street secondary plan has further policies for potential gateway features and for special character roads, and also for listed heritage properties and designated heritage properties. So this property has a few listed heritage properties, well, 3, and it's also within the community node. And here we have our Appendix B of our Ancaster Wilson Street secondary plan. This is appendix that kind of highlights the connectivity pattern for multi-use trails within Ancaster and bike lanes within Ancaster. So the policy that I've extracted, it's designated mixed-use medium density. Again, it's within a pedestrian focus area. Multiple dwelling is a permitted use. However, retirement home is not a permitted use, so they will require an amendment to the Ancaster Wilson Street secondary plan to permit the retirement home. A maximum building height of 2.5 stories is required within the Ancaster Wilson Street secondary plan. The applicant is trying to amend this to allow for up to 7 stories or 6 stories, depending on which concept they go with. In terms of the design policies that Ancaster Wilson Street secondary plan applies, they shall be consistent with the, they shall be sympathetic to adjacent building styles, features, and materials when adjacent to a designated or listed heritage building. New development shall complement the distinct character, design, style, building materials, and characteristics which define the character area. Shall only apply to commercial and mixed-use areas, institutional and multi-residential developments. So we don't really apply our Ancaster urban, we don't apply our design guidelines to single detached dwellings. Shall foster streets as interactive outdoor spaces for pedestrians. Mixed use and commercial development or redevelopment shall provide a buffer such as landscaped areas or adjacent sensitive land uses. The village core area shall be consistent with the following design considerations. For buildings fronting onto Wilson Street, setbacks may be varied as per the character of the village core area. Buildings within the village core area should incorporate historical building features and styles in order to encourage a village atmosphere and pleasant pedestrian experience. Should express a strong heritage design character that invites pedestrians and encourages interaction. And heritage characteristics of the village core area can be strengthened through the use of a public walkway linking buildings and other uses. With respect to gateways, gateways may take the form of a structure and or a sign placed or landscaped area or laneway. Gateway type and design shall vary based on character, area and function. Gateway design and features shall be promoted, shall be completed to the satisfaction of the city. With respect, Ancaster, Wilson Street, they have a number of policies that are to ensure that the historical character of Ancaster is preserved. Some of them are as follows. The retention and conservation of historical buildings, structures, or features on their original sites shall be encouraged through adaptive reuse and preservation of existing buildings before new development or redevelopment is considered, integrating cultural heritage resources into new development or redevelopment proposals in their original use or an appropriate adaptive reuse where possible. And another document that we have that applies to this site is the Ancaster Wilson Street Urban Design Guidelines. I'm just going to go over the objectives real quickly. They lay it out into three categories. We have heritage objectives, community focus objectives, and connectivity objectives. So the heritage objectives to conserve and protect historic landscapes, build to promote interpretation and understanding of the history and culture, to maintain the existing pedestrian scale and character of Ancaster, to ensure Ancaster remains a vibrant pedestrian-oriented place that encourages a diversity of desirable activities, to develop an attractive, inviting, safe, and comfortable public realm. Community focus objectives to create a community center with both heritage and economic components to enhance the organization, function, and comprehension of the community, to promote economic stability, to instill urban vitality and encourage street activity, to encourage investment and economic development, to support successful retailing and business activity, and to encourage social interaction and public gathering.
James, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up, or else we're not going to have enough time.
Okay, I'll just go along to our zoning. Property zone C5A, it's a mixed use pedestrian focus zone in our 05200 bylaw. And they are seeking some amendments, which I think the applicant can maybe provide an overview of. My questions for the design review panel. Does the proposal represent compatible integration with the surrounding area in terms of scale, use, and character? Does the proposal help achieve the design objectives, function, and design character of the village core character area? And does the proposal complement and animate the existing surroundings through building design and placement, as well as through placement of pedestrian amenities? Thank you for having me.
Thanks, James. Could the consultant provide additional information, and I ask them to limit their presentation to 10 minutes as well?
Maybe I could do that. Let me share my screen. Okay, this was the submission to the panel, so I hope you've had a chance to review it. I'm sure you have. I'm going to start with a bit of a description of the program. I think it's important to understand. And sorry, I trust everyone can hear me. I had trouble at the outset with my audio, but that's what happens when you go from a Zoom meeting to a WebEx meeting. Anyway, this is a seniors retirement home, and it's a mixed-use building. It's a building that includes some retail. It includes heritage assets, heritage buildings, and it includes a mix of housing options for seniors. It includes memory care, which is unfortunately a growing issue, a growing demand in communities. It involves assisted living, where physical assistance and some medical assistance is required for some of the residents. So there's, in this case, we have an entire floor dedicated to assisted living, an entire floor dedicated to memory care. And about the rest of the building, 4 floors of the building are dedicated to what we call independent living. So seniors that have mobility and don't rely so much on support staff, but do rely on central dining. This is not a licensed retirement home or a licensed long-term care facility where people with more dire health needs are accommodated. So this is a way to bridge between independent living and some degree of assisted living at that stage of life. The number of units is important to make these function. We generally find that we have to provide between 160 to 180, some are even larger, but in this case, we're proposing 182 units of that mixed variety. And that's an important program statement because they function best at that type of level with underground parking, with central services, with staffing. These are the types of building forms that have the reality check is to make sure you have the number of units and the appropriate types of facilities. So it informs the scale, and that's why these are showing up as mid-rise buildings in the 6 to 8 story range. One of the ones we've done from an urban design perspective, we did in Bronte Village, another kind of desirable location, not unlike Ancaster. These homes are finding their place in established communities that have a desirable character. It's a very common situation where we're trying to insert these that on the surface have a mass component that's generally larger than prevailing context scale. But we're doing it in a way where we try to find ways to blend it into that community. And that's really the theme of what we've done here. We've tried to provide edges, in all cases, an edge to Wilson Street that recognizes the heritage presence, the heritage character. There's an important grading consideration, which distorts the idea of reading heights. Heights are from individual perspectives, either at the low scale at Rousseau or from the main street at the southern end of Wilson Street. And you'll see that the building has different outward expressions. So the attempt here was to try to make the outward expression of the building lower in its general massing and scale and respond to each of the contexts. The south context, if you just look at the image on the screen, the south context at Rousseau does express greater height, but as you move into the village, you come to heritage assets at the very south end. But you see that the building has been broken up in a way to establish street walls and a kind of apparent heights that are in the 2 to 3 story range. And that's an important principle to try to, let's call tame the massing to be more at a scale and of a character that has some reference to heritage characteristics and has a spatial respect in terms of landscape and pedestrian realm that begins to introduce amenities along the public realm edge of the site. I think you're familiar with the context, and these are just some of the images of the immediate context. Some are a little further afield. This is a recent building that's always been proclaimed as a fairly important approach to new construction in the village. It reflects some of the heritage characteristics that are outlined in the guidelines in the secondary plan. You can see these buildings are ones, some of which are being retained on the property, two of which are being retained on the property, 450 and 442, and that's been an evolution of the project. We started with the saving only of 442, but through collaboration with our heritage consultants and with the city, we've established that 2 of these buildings can be saved, and a public realm component of it that creates a kind of an open space onto the street, a kind of a community gathering spot between the buildings is an important outcome of that. These are some of the building characteristics that are called for in the secondary plan guidelines, and they simply talk to a question of scale and a kind of a heritage character that's replicated. And that's always an interesting challenge. How do you do a new building that's of 6 or 7 stories that still has a kind of a reading of compatibility in a context such as this? And so these are some of the design intentions, is to really break down the mass of the building into components that can be read quite individually. And you see again on the bottom left, you see a series of what could be considered almost independent buildings, including 2 heritage buildings, each of which has a front that is compatible, or frontage which is compatible with the prevailing lot pattern in the historic village, where lots they range from 20-meter widths, they can be less than that, 50 or 60 feet. So that becomes a kind of metric to begin to divide up the street wall of the streetscape. This is where we had started with an original concept, and it has evolved to essentially take the same ideas of multiple individual built form as the predominant foreground experience, with breaks between that are indented courtyards, and then the single heritage building retained. It has evolved to one where two heritage buildings are retained, and the same effect has been tried to be created with the individual built form at 2 to 3 stories at the northern end of the site. So we went through an evolution where we were trying to determine what the appropriate extent of heritage character in terms of windows, in terms of some sloped roof, to give it some kind of tie into what exists in the community. But also in a contemporary vein, we wanted it to be a modern building, a contemporary building. So there are elements of glass and atrium glass that are a little more, let's call it out of character in a way, but still within a framework of these character elements that are brought to the foreground. This is giving you just a sense of some of the datum lines. We've tried to establish kind of a two-story datum line as an important read. And even that, there's a kind of an upper level series of steps that are starting to emerge as a height. So this is declared as 6 stories and 5 stories from Wilson Street. But as you see on the back, it actually becomes a kind of a 7-story exposure by virtue of the grades dropping on this side. And the plan will reveal some of these relationships. But even on the, let's call it the backside, away from Wilson, we're employing a kind of a 3-building foreground proposition, which I'll show you an angular plane that it relates to an idea of stepping down these elements and keeping the 7-story and 5-story component set back through these larger courtyards. And you'll see that more evident in the plan view. These give you a kind of a quick snapshot of what I've just been talking about. You've seen this one already. Here's a view of the heritage buildings looking more to the north, and the new builds that are at the scale of 2 to 3 stories towards the north end. This is the Rousseau end, where you do see a little more expression of scale, 4 stories as a street wall with the step back. All of the car access and truck access components are through a porte cochere at this end. And you can begin to see the strategies for these courtyards and these step back components of the building. You see it at the bottom right a little bit better. You see there's a presence of 3 buildings that start as a lower rise building, then rise up to the 6 stories or 7 stories as you move towards Wilson Street. This gives you a bit of a functional snapshot. The ground floors of these buildings are filled with amenity, almost entirely filled with things like dining rooms, commercial kitchens, a major entry, and public realm components, public amenity components, including lounges, a series of different types of lounges. There's libraries, there's meeting rooms. Principal entry is seen to be on the corner of Rousseau and Wilson. A drop-off and convenience access, because this has to be completely accessible. And given all the grading that's gone on the site, there's almost 2 stories of grade drop from one end to the other. This had to be a kind of 3-dimensional puzzle that allowed it to be barrier-free and accessible at all levels. Truck loading is brought into this location. The central kitchen obviously is serviced by that, and parking's handled in underground on 2 levels. What's shown in the darker green are potential for commercial activities that function, that support the street life. So you're going to see at each level, as you step up the site, you will see other kinds of retail that meet the sidewalk, in this case at the 2nd floor. And here at the lowest level is where we had the first set of retail. And then the retail occurs in this area. I'll show you on the plan, it's a little easier to read. And then some of the heritage buildings would be repurposed for retail uses as well. So these are elevations that give you a sense of the kind of approach to the stepping down and the massing at different sides. I'll just spend a minute here to show you angular plane assessments. And as you know, we use in the corridor principles in Hamilton, where we take 80% of the width of the right-of-way and project a 40 to 45-degree angle. You can see here that all of the built form, especially the higher parts of the built form, stand well clear of that test for corridors in Hamilton. This is quite different than a corridor in the sense that it has the heritage scaling and the heritage character. But you can see how the heritage assets are kind of brought in with space around them so that they're fully appreciated on all sides. And they're combined with a kind of a public realm piece that's an extension of the sidewalk component. So this becomes a kind of a retail dwelling spot. It could be considered a POPS, a privately owned public space, and it would provide amenity to the streetscape, which meets some of the official plan objectives that were spoken about earlier.
Michael, I just
On the
want to
residential,
flag the time here, so if you can.
thank you. Yeah, I think I just will end on this. The residential side, we've looked at a different formula of about an average grade. We've used an 11-meter high exposing wall at a setback, and then a 45-degree angle that informs the step back. So these are the principal ideas. Some of these views are from that residential side, so you see the effect of it both in winter and summer. You can see the application of those planes. There's a landscape plan that begins to give you the sense of the courtyards, both to the residential side and the community area and the corner area, each of which are being developed as public realm components. This is a view of the very corner entrance down at Rousseau, and where the grade starts to rise along Wilson. So it becomes a kind of a notable address and a welcome, kind of a gateway entrance into the village. And I think with that, I'll leave it to questions. These plans are here to show you how the building is organized. It best shows the kind of courtyard considerations and the stepped provisions of these extensions towards the residential neighborhood. And it shows you the courtyards and the retail functions within the heritage assets. So I think that's enough to explain the urban design approach on this. You can see how the building reduces in size. There's 2 levels of underground parking. And now there's been these other studies have been done, a sun and shadow study. They're available for discussion. They show that there's no more than 3 hours of shadow on any public realm component. Visual impact analysis
Thank you, Michael.
reveals no. Okay.
Thank you,
Thank
Michael. I'm going to go to the panelists for questions. Jana, you're first.
Thank you. I don't have too many questions, but I wonder if you could maybe elaborate a little bit. And I understand that the grading challenges are maybe we can rather think of them as opportunities. And I would like if you could speak to that interaction mentioned in several policies and guidelines, the interaction between the street and the proposed building and the active pedestrian focus along Wilson Street, especially toward that corner.
Yeah, it's difficult to express in 2D, and but I'll start there only in the sense that the corner is really the place where the lowest level of the building meets Rousseau Street. So this is one touch point or connection point to the public realm. And and as this is a building that needs accessibility, this drives the entire floor plate as pretty much one level. There may be some slight ramp changes between it, but right now it's shown as one continuous grade level with elevator access. So that's one touch point that says it's an important connection to community at this point. And as you move up the building, you'll see that this is level 1, or so the floor above, if you will. And this is where you're starting to see the courtyards and the retail for this component. And I call this the kind of the Wilson Street connectivity. This is the public realm or the welcoming component for that.
Michael, I'm going to have to ask you to be very brief with your answers. We're running out of time here. So.
I think we are good. Thank you. That's fine.
Okay. Joey?
Thanks.
I don't know.
Thanks, David. I just for clarity, we the panel was able to review one option for this project, but Joe had mentioned, or James had mentioned, that we're looking at 2 options now. I don't want to speak for the panel, but I don't know if we'll be able to comment on 2 different options today.
This, I think the proposal before you is the 7-story option. That's the one that we would prefer that you responded to.
Okay. Okay. A couple of questions. I'm a bit confused about the base point for the angular plane. On one side of the building off the street, it's across the street. And then on the back side, it's I think starts at the wall. So is that based on Hamilton's policy for angular planes? Because typically they start
Yes.
at the sidewalk of the property.
Yeah, we've used what we've taken from the corridor guidelines for Hamilton, which on the street side takes it from a point 80% of the width of the street right of way. So in the case of a 20-meter right of way, it's at a point about 16 meters away from the property line. And that's what defines the envelope from the public realm side.
Okay.
From the private side, those same guidelines show a kind of an approach to angular plane from the residential side.
Mm.
And in this case, we've created a what I'd call an amalgam, something that's not directly from the guidelines, but shows an 11-meter height or a 3-story height, and then a 45-degree angular plane. And that's defining these projecting elements. This piece of the building, the farther piece away from the property line, conforms completely with an angular plane drawn from grade.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Thanks. Also, just for a bit of background, was the removal of the Brandon House part of this process?
That predated our involvement, unfortunately.
Okay. Is it the same applicant?
We had a
response to that. Sorry. The Brandon House it's the same owners, same applicants.
Okay.
It was removed through a standard building permit process and met the city's requirements. And it was before the team was put together.
Okay. Was there at any point an option considered for this development where the house would be kept in place?
This team wasn't involved in that, in anything in that.
Sorry,
that included the Brandon House.
This is Aaron Waxman, one of the partners at Point Capital Management. We're the developers. It was not an option because of the condition of the building. So,
was it? Okay. Was there a building condition assessment undertaken prior to the demolition?
Yes.
Okay.
Anyway, we went through all the proper processes, and unfortunately, it was a requirement given the condition of the building that we had to demolish it. But one of the good things is we did retain quite a bit of the stone, and we fully intend on repurposing that, as you can see in some of the materiality on the front corner of the building.
Okay, thank you.
So, and sorry, Joey, just for 2 points of clarification. So yes, to that point, the building was demoed before our involvement and predates our involvement in the file. So there was no potential for us to retain it. It wasn't there. By the time we were retained, it was already gone. And secondarily, the one point I wanted to clarify is that the building is essentially the same, whether it's the retirement or the mixed use, with the only difference being the 6-story, or I guess the 7-story for retirement. The potential for connection to the pedestrian realm, Yana and others, does increase slightly with the mixed use building. But to Michael's point, Wilson Street is almost 2.5 stories lower, that corner, than it is from the south edge. So we've had to be strategic with where we can find connections, because that is a continuous.
You know, guys, I'm quite worried about the time. If we're going to get any opportunity for commentary back, so I'm even going to ask the panel.
David, I think we're going to be going beyond the time here, and I don't know what that means. Maybe the last project for today's session gets dropped off, but I think there's a lot to talk about here, and I think the panel needs to really get into it.
I can't really comment on that, but I think I'm asking if you can be concise in your questions and in the answers.
I'm trying. It's just, again, there's a lot of content and there's a lot of background to this project, and the reason I'm asking about the Brandon House is that
your questions. Just go to your questions, Joey, please.
I don't have any further questions.
Okay, thank you. Hoda?
Hi, thank you, David, and thank you for presentation. Again, coming back to 2 options, I have a question about how the the secondary access from Wilson is make a difference for mixed use rather than retirement. How do you think that we won't need an access from Wilson for retirement home rather than mixed use?
Retirement homes generally try to limit their access points for a variety of reasons, COVID being one of the more recent concerns. So the idea with the seniors home is if there are outdoor areas like in courtyards, they would have to have some security protection because we have memory care patients, we have residents that could wander off. So security is a big issue, and that's why we limit, in the case of a seniors or retirement home, access points.
So the access for the retirement is either from the back of the building, from the drop-off, or the main entrance, and the people should go through the food court or the lounges to have access to the elevators. Am I right?
And that's the predominant way. There may be exit passages that are allowed for more independent persons to the north of the site, but it wouldn't be an entrance point. It would just be an access to community through some system of control in the building.
Okay.
It's a big issue for a retirement building to understand and control access.
Okay. Short another question about the facade toward the Wilson Street. I was wondering from the existing building that is we are keeping that from that point to the main entrance. Is it about 60 meter long, the facade? Am I right?
I'm sorry, the distance you said was?
The part of facade that there is no entrance from the existing building to the main entrance. How long is it?
So where my cursor is, maybe you can help me. Are you talking about from here down to here?
From the second, from the second building.
This one here?
Yeah, down to the main entrance. Is it almost 60?
Yeah, it's because the entire site is just is almost 120 meters. So this is about the midpoint.
Okay.
A little over the midpoint. So it's about 60 meters to the main corner entrance. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's my question.
Jennifer Sizen?
I have no other questions. Thank you.
Jennifer Mallard?
For the questions. Look forward to getting to the comments.
Eldon?
I have no further questions. Thank you for the presentation.
Ted?
Just one point of clarification. The scheme that we are assessing, the retirement home facility, are you proposing an access point on the Wilson Avenue?
So the access is actually facing the corner, accessible from Russo. It's right at the corner there.
Understood, but we didn't receive some of the materials that you showed in the presentation, and there was an entrance kind of midpoint that was shown early in the presentation. Is that only for the second option that you were speculating on?
Yeah, so the midpoint entrance, any entrance into the building along the main avenue would be in the mixed use option. In the retirement option, the entrances would be limited to as Michael noted, to the corner or into the inside of the courtyard.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Okay, thanks, Ted. The only question I have is really for the planner. Is the city considering any other development in this area of this scale in a favorable way? It's a yes or no question.
We don't have any other developments to my knowledge in this area of this scale.
Okay, then I think we can go to the first panel members' comments. Jana, I should say.
Thank you, David, and thank you for your presentation. Okay, to me, the proposal is of an extremely large massing for this area and very much out of scale. I really appreciate that your design is trying to break the massing, and I appreciate the step backs. But I think that in this case, just the step backs won't really help. And for this area and for the established small scale patterns in the village, I really don't think that such a large building would be appropriate here. And I think it should be significantly reduced in massing. And I understand from what you were describing that you need certain amount of units for this to be functional. So maybe in that case, this probably is not an appropriate site for the retirement home you are envisioning. And when reduced in size and redesigned, I would strongly suggest to eliminate elements which are just adding to the massing, such as the mansard roof, for example, or some of the stronger, taller elements which are not present in this area, such as the 2 to 3 story windows on the front facades. Again, not helping creating that relationship with the existing patterns in the village. So I would suggest significantly reducing the building's massing, focus on creating smaller patterns, which would be more friendly to the patterns in the area. Focus on the ground floor and the actual active relationship with the public realm. It's strongly mentioned in all of the policies, all of the guidelines, and it's not achieved with this option at all. Maybe the ground floor needs to be on 2 levels, and you need to deal with the accessibility between these levels within the building and use that slope of the road to your benefit. I think that's all from me.
Joey.
Thanks, David. And thanks, James and Michael, for your presentations. I agree with Jana here. I will maybe focus my comments more on the heritage piece. Michael, and I know you have a lot of experience with heritage buildings, and I actually appreciate the way that you have developed a very kind of difficult design and program to try to make it fit into this existing neighborhood. Understanding the lot lines, breaking it down, having variation in massing, trying to pull the building back a bit, respecting the remaining heritage buildings and creating sort of public space around them. I think these are very, very difficult things to do. It's a very challenging site. But I think I have to go back to the official plan, urban design policy, and also the heritage objectives, in where it lists does this development respect the existing character, development patterns, and built form landscape. If you look at the larger context and the larger neighborhood, there's the new building doesn't really align with the existing character or the development patterns or the built form landscape. And I think really the biggest issue here is that the neighborhood is lined with single family homes, small buildings, and generous landscapes and mature landscapes. So what's missing from this proposal is that relationship between the generous landscape and the building. Even though there are attempts to create landscape, this is largely a project that is building. It's mostly building, and it's very, very urban in character. So there's a real mismatch between what this project is attempting to do and what's happening in the neighborhood. That's all from me. Thank you.
It's Aaron Waxman here from.
Actually, I'm going to have to ask you to keep any comments to the end.
That's fine.
Okay, Hoda.
Yes. I really appreciate the try to have the retirement home in this neighborhood, that it's aging, but at the same time, I echo my colleagues' comments about massing and having overscale building in this neighborhood. And I appreciate the try to break down the facade by keeping some existing buildings, but still it's a big one, and even the rest of the building still need to be break down, and because it's not compatible with the urban and landscape and architectural pattern of the neighborhood. Even the commercial and retail who exist in this neighborhood, they are in the small, in the human scale with the direct access to the pedestrian areas and the public home that is not achievable with this design. I appreciate the try, but I also echo my colleagues' comments about rethinking about the design of this property. Thank you.
Jennifer Sison.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael and James, for your presentations. As others have noted, the massing and height for either option really doesn't meet the vision for the area. There seems to be a real need to go further to reduce the impacts on the neighboring properties as well as the view from the street. And the height and length of the building proposed is far larger than anything that's existing in Ancaster. So if this moves forward at this scale, it would be setting a precedent for the area that's much larger development than's currently permitted. Also, given that Wilson is intended to have cycling infrastructure in the future, I find that there's a bit of a lack of cycling amenities in this proposal. I didn't see any, so I'd like to see that in the future as well. I agree with Joey. The space for landscaping is very small compared to the context, but aside from that, I do see it as a positive element in this design. I find it well thought out, like the inclusion of public art, the use of the reclaimed heritage materials, and the planting along the streetscape and in the plazas surrounding the existing heritage houses starts to soften that building facade. However, there is no access to the heritage buildings and community space from the proposed building, at least in the heritage or the retirement community version of this proposal. And the pedestrian circulation around the site is lacking because of this, as residents would need to walk to the north end of the building to exit and then walk south along the entire road to access these and other shops in Ancaster. There's really a missed opportunity for the commercial units here as well. They could have independent access for the street, understanding the seniors' homes want to limit access and that grading along the street is a challenge. I would still prefer to see these uses being independent from the building with frontage and access to the street. The lack of any entrances on Wilson really diminishes the activity potential you have here, along with the reduced glazing. Really can create the potential for blank or dead wall spaces at grade, making the streetscape less desirable than it really could be. I am appreciative of the provision of independent and assisted living and the work that has obviously gone into this proposal, but I think more needs to be done to fit it into the context and provide a truly lively pedestrian realm in this area. But thank you. That's it for me.
Jennifer Mallard.
Thanks, David, and thanks for your presentation. I agree largely with comments of my colleagues. I think the proposal is just too far of a departure in height and scale from the official plan targets. I understand the need for keeping Wilson Street a secure line for the type of residents that are in there, but I'm concerned there's not even a visual connection to the social spaces of the proposed plan because they're underground for most of Wilson Street. I think there's a scale challenge with a lot of the articulation of the proposal. The large two-story windows, as somebody mentioned already, are out of keeping with the smaller character of the heritage buildings. So that's it for me. I'm in the interest of time, we can move on.
Eldon.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm not going to repeat the comments that my colleagues have shared. I do share a lot of those thoughts. I do empathize with this group in terms of the need to balance the programming of seniors housing, long-term care, assisted living, memory care, and what those programs need, and the issues that you have with respect to grade and how you animate the street. I do recognize, the need to maintain security for this type of facility. And so the balance of having animation along the street and having activity and maintaining, a safe environment for your seniors is a challenge, something that through design innovation, you can find a way either through multiple levels to overcome that, whether it's an introduction of maybe non-programmed, non-specific retail within the seniors building instead of having independent tenants helping to make some of those components. But I had also shared the concerns as it relates to the adjacent dwelling, I believe to the south. And just the sheer change in scale and size, I think there needs to be more sensitivity to that relationship. I think it's a good start. I think there are a lot of comments that my colleagues shared that I think should be taken to heart as part of the proposal. But I think a lot of great efforts have been put here. I know it's a challenging site, and I know seniors housing is an important component, but it can't just be squeezed in for the sake of being squeezed in if it has a detrimental impact to the overall character of the community. Thanks.
Ed?
Yeah, really support all of the comments we've heard today, and I won't repeat too many of them. Just, generally support the idea, and we're hopeful that this development can transform to meet some of the comments that are being brought forward. This type of program in this community, I think, is really important and valuable. Particularly as the anchor to this high street that's got this character. There is a real cognitive dissonance between the Ancaster secondary plan, the character that's been developed in that, the thinking within that, and this scale of this development, and its relationship to its neighbors, I think, is very problematic in terms of shadow and scale, and also. I think even with assisted living, a lot of those folks would really want to be traveling up the street south and having access at grade at the south end of the site. I think understanding the challenges around security, I think that should be something that in a revised proposal should be considered to be accommodated to allow folks who are mobile to access all of the services and create the community that this has the potential to create. I think the city really wants to consider this project as a potential precedent because it will entirely change the scale of Ancaster as a precedent of this size. So that's a comment to the city to really consider this. Thank you for your presentation.
Thanks, Ted. I don't have much more to add. I second all of the comments that the panelists have made concerning the scale, the issues of lack of pedestrian access along the street and whatnot. I think that I certainly endorse the strategies that you've used to try and deal with the struggle you have to fit a building of this scale on the project. And in a more modest version of this, if it was to be scaled down, I would encourage an even more enthusiastic embracement of those ideas of modulating the massing. For example, the little indents that you have on the portion that comes along Wilson Street, the indents I think are insufficient to really break it down into the kind of the smaller modules that the existing heritage elements represent. So I would argue you'd almost want to go, enough to establish them as similar elements there, but in some ways that is a minor aspect of what is really a big scale challenge that you have. Even the idea that the memory units is at grade and really what people are looking into when they're walking down the street, it seems somewhat problematic to me. So I echo Ted and others' comments about trying to figure out a better strategy so the things, even if it is ending up being a retirement facility, that there are public billiard rooms or whatever that you're getting at that kind of intersection with street. But ideally, it would be something that would generate an entrance and activity along that side. I know that I cut off, I think it was Mr. Waxman's comments at one point, and I would open the floor for questions or comments at this point. I know we've run a little bit over, but we're not too bad.
Okay, sorry.
Just one comment, David. I just looked on our planning data lookup mapping now, and there was a formal consultation for 412 Ancaster or Wilson Street East that was also for a 6-story building at 122 units.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks very much for that. If now is a good time to speak, I'd just like to make a couple comments. Firstly, in terms of the mass, our mixed use option is 1 story less, which is significantly less than a lot of the heights. When you look at a lot of the times, the 6-story might only actually represent 3 stories above grade. The second thing is Hamilton has recently declined to expand the urban boundary, and there's new people and new growth and new population growth in Hamilton, and Ancaster is a part of Hamilton. I grew up in Ancaster. I love Ancaster. I'd like to see, tasteful use of architecture bring Ancaster forward and allow new people to experience growing up in Ancaster and living in Ancaster. And I think given those changes, if we're not going to grow out, we have to grow up, and there's got to be a missing middle component here. When you look at Ancaster locally, you can look at Dundas, and on the peripheries or the gateways of Dundas's downtown, you have significantly more height than 6 stories, and it's been able to maintain a heritage feel in the village. And to me, again, growing up in Ancaster, this is the gateway site to Ancaster. And if there was ever a site close to the core that deserves to have density and some height to really put a frame on Ancaster, it's this site. And my last comment, because I don't want to go too long, is to Joey with respect to your comments about heritage. There is the almost neighboring site that there's going to be a proposal for 6 or more stories on, and there's some heritage issues there as well. We've gone above and beyond to engage with our heritage consultants and take everything they said to heart. And that's why, as a developer, we looked at these heritage buildings, the second one, and it was hard to really see the heritage value in that. But when we understand, the interaction with the streetscape and what that means, we went above and beyond to do everything in this design that our heritage consultant asked us to consider the heritage impacts of our buildings. So, I think while there were some, there's some old issues to do with heritage, we've really taken a keen interest in trying to be a good developer in terms of the heritage implications of our development. And
I appreciate that, and I can see that solely in this project. My comments were more about the longer process. So I know that a heritage consultant was involved. They're a good heritage consultant, but were they brought in at the very beginning? Were they brought in to consider the heritage value of the Brandon House? Were they brought in to look at, retaining the Brandon House and maybe demolishing the other 2 houses that are left over, which have significantly less heritage value than the Brandon House did? I mean, I agree. I think this project will really be an anchor for Ancaster, but I also think the Brandon House serves as an anchor as well. And I just want to ensure that it got its sort of, fair shot at this project.
Yeah, I agree with you, Joey. And look, that's in the rearview mirror. And really, the condition of the building was such that we didn't see any opportunity to save it. Again, we've tried to save those elements and stones as part of this design. But I mean, it's in the rearview mirror. There's absolutely nothing we can do about it. But
yeah,
what we can do is what we've done here. And I think when you look at the buildings we're preserving, we're going above and beyond to try to be a developer that really considers the heritage impacts of this development.
And I can see that. And thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Joey.
Thank for your feedback or your comments, Mr. Waxman.
Thank you.
And I don't think that we're against some increase in density in this site. I don't think the comments from the panel are against that entirely. I just think it's a matter of where to draw that line. And I think you've drawn the line higher than anybody on the panel feels comfortable with, I guess is what we're trying to say. But certainly other aspects of it are quite commendable, and I sort of encourage you to try and go back there. I mean, I heard when you were saying that this kind of facility, or somebody, I guess maybe it was Michael Spaziani, was saying between 180 and 160 units can make it work, and you're at 182. It sounds like you could slim it down and maybe come back with something that was more in keeping with the something smaller, and maybe some of the other comments we have about the organization of the inside versus the outside challenges that we see on this site, and maybe it works better for commercial because of that possibility. I'm not totally, I didn't really comment on this, but I'm not a big fan, I guess, about this sort of the historical pastiche, and I would, I guess, reinforce the comment about the sort of scale of these two-story windows, given the nature of the other heritage characters. It is a little bit of a shopping mall motif that you're bringing in here, I'd say. So anyway, that's pretty fine-grained comment relative to the larger issue that's really about scale here. I think that's our concern. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. We have another panel that we have to prepare for, so I think at that we'll
Understood.
close it out.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
I understand them, and we will discuss them.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Have a good
Thank
afternoon.
you.
Thanks, everyone.